Episode 21 had huge implications for the overarching story of Delicious in Dungeon, both in the latter half with the introduction of the seemingly trapped in immortality Golden Country, something that we've only heard mentioned up until now, and with the introduction of the long-awaited Western Elves. The Western Elves and their place in this world has been intentionally kept vague, with ominous threats of their arrival should they catch wind of anything less than savory happening in the dungeon. This led me to believe initially that the Western Elves were sort of black magic task force, a team that would be deployed to arrest anyone in the dungeon caught explicitly using black magic. But in this new episode, and with these new developments, it seems like there's a lot more to the Western Elves and their place in the political machinations of this world than I initially thought. As Kabru, Shuro, and their respective teams make their way above ground after meeting with Laios, they immediately notice the silver boat anchored in the harbor of the island. Kabru recognizes the sigil and the golden figurehead on the boat immediately, for reasons we'll touch on later, and mentions that it must be the Canaries. This elven squad being called the Canaries is in itself a clever name. Canaries have long had a universal connotation with being the first to notice danger, going back to the old 20th century coal mine days. You probably heard the idiom, being a canary in a coal mine before. Canaries were brought into caves by miners to detect carbon monoxide, as the birds would suffer the effects of the invisible, odorless, poisonous gases faster than miners themselves, collapsing in their cages as a visible warning sign of the unseen danger, and thus miners knew that going further would surely kill them. Running with this metaphor in the most literal sense, are these Western Elves themselves birds in cages sent to test the fatality of the dungeon before it's too late? Would this imply that the Western Elves Canaries are actually quite expendable to the rest of the elves, perhaps criminals, mercenaries, or maybe just elves with a few screws loose? Canary could also imply a sort of rank or branch, a specific chapter sent for a specific purpose, in this case testing out the waters of a dungeon that's quickly becoming unmanageable. Are there other teams of Western Elves, or maybe is this a universal catch-all terms for elves that sail directly to other islands and interfere with their affairs? Kabru is no stranger to the Canaries. After the destruction of his hometown Utaya, Western Elves were the ones that handled the cleanup of the monsters running rampant. Kabru has mixed feelings towards this. To Shuro and Amari, he displays a skepticism towards the idea that elves should be allowed to intervene in world affairs at a moment's notice. But in meeting the Western Elves, we learn that Kabru was adopted by a Western Elf vice captain, and even tried to join the ranks of the Western Elf squadrons, something he innately couldn't do because of being a tall man. Kabru continues to recall what happened in Utaya. The Western Elves' invasion and subsequent collapse of the dungeon caused some unforeseen problems. The casualties of Utaya began to turn into monsters themselves and ate the survivors. Now, this is the first mention of humans actually becoming monsters in the series, aside from, well, you know, the thing. And that subtle mention seems to have a ton of implication. Interestingly, Kabru's report of the whole Fallon situation is actually framed more like this than anything to do with black magic or anything else regarding Laios' party. He reports that they came across a human who turned into a monster, implying that this might be the biggest warning sign above anything else that's happened so far in the dungeon. The Western Elves are shocked, but also explicitly familiar with chimeras, mentioning them by name, remarking that the dungeon is progressing faster than expected. Kabru states that they should seal the dungeon off and they can't risk feeding it anymore. Feeding it what? Any more adventurers? Any more monsters? Any more souls? Almost as if to regale a message back to the homeland, one of the elves summons a little fairy. Maybe this is a message for reinforcements, or maybe to simply inform the rest of the elves of the dire predicament on the island. The captain grabs the fairy though, indicating that what's said here doesn't leave this room. The captain of the Canaries, I'm assuming, announces that they'll begin preparations for the investigation of the dungeon, but also announces his willingness to temporarily allow Kabru to enact his plans to evacuate the first floor, while in the same breath announcing his suspicions that Kabru might be secretly plotting something more than he's letting on. The souls of those in the dungeon, humans turning into monsters, nutrients, eggs. Is this all a part of the dungeon as a larger digestive system, where humans and souls are the nourishment and monsters are what's left behind? And how does that tie into what we've just learned about the immortal Golden Country hiding in the lower levels of the dungeon itself? There's a lot of questions left unanswered after this episode, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. I wonder if we'll get any tangible explanations before the end of the season. Could Laios have a vision of the Golden Lion that's supposed to deliver prophecies to the people in the Golden Country? And would this character even give Laios the answers even if he had them? Anyway though, if you're a big fan of Delicious in Dungeon and Dungeon Meshi, I make Delicious in Dungeon reaction videos every single week, as well as making theory videos and video essays about Delicious in Dungeon and other anime, things like that. If you like the video and like this type of content, feel free to subscribe. Please, no spoilers in the comments. I'm an anime only and I will not be reading past this point, so yeah, please don't spoil, please don't correct. Just let me know if you like the video. And other anime onlys, what are your thoughts on the Western Elves? Where do you think they fit into this story as a whole? Do you think they're friends, foes? Leave a comment below. Upcoming videos will center around specific characters and their arcs, where I think their stories might be headed, and what I think their pasts might be. This will go for basically all characters of the show, providing that they're not immediately answered in these last couple episodes. And yeah, I'm just excited to share my theories, share my thoughts, and spread the love of this amazing, kind of underrated series. Thank you to my patrons over on Patreon and YouTube channel members. Their names will be on the screen right now, and you can check out my Patreon for all my videos, ad-free, extended cuts, and with no worries of copyright. So I can include more of the music, more of the scenes in their entirety instead of having to chop it up for YouTube. So if you want the entire thing, check out my Patreon. Thank you guys, and until next video.